sorry, very diverse set of stakeholders, including the children, in in our discussion group. So these are what we came up with. So we identified certain issues and then recommendations. So the first one is ensuring representation of from experts with a background relevant stakeholder and user groups, including governments. We got that from the IPCC document. So the clear recommendations that came out from our discussions was to prepare and execute a communication plan before and after each stage of the scoping. Make sure that there are representatives from different levels of policy making, because so far we only target a general set of policymakers, but the mandate says at all levels. And then we will request, we recommend that we request UN, IPCC accredited observer organizations and other relevant climate change networks to help support the scoping work, particularly in terms of recommending the set of experts that will be engaged in the scoping process. And to ensure that, we do encourage a strong, inclusive pre-scoping and expert-based scoping process as well, with to include very specific set of non non-scientists in the group, like cities, NGOs, youth, children, business, faith-based organizations, and other stakeholder groups. And the output from the pre-scoping dialogue must inform the scoping process. Then, the group was concerned about managing risk of increasing demands during and after the scoping process. So there was a suggestion to use tagging, of search tags, and making sure if you want to know what people are most interested in, look at what's out there in the internet and tag actually what's most relevant, and then perhaps address this and make sure that they're included in the scoping process. Again, in terms of outreach, in identifying IPCC's stakeholder, we had to clarify this. Who are really the stakeholders? Because everybody wants everybody in. But so we had to go back to the mandate of the IPCC, and the most important stakeholders are the governments and policymakers at all levels, including the UNFCCC. So, and then we clarified that the secondary set of stakeholders include UN, the IGOs, business, NGOs, public, and the media, among others. So the recommendation is perhaps we can have some set of IPCC dialogues as part of the pre-scoping process and also during the outreach, so that we have the opportunity to engage the stakeholders as well as policymakers at all levels of the outreach process. So there was also a question that is the IPCC in the process of outreach being asked to do something beyond its mandate or practice of outreach. So we had to clarify what kind of outreach is actually stated in the mandate of IPCC. And clearly it was downstream communication. So making the reports available and accessible. So again, as a recommendation, given that the UNFCCC, the negotiators, are among its primary stakeholders, number one, the IPCC can perhaps strengthen the communication with the UNFCCC. That's one. We could also, the IPCC could also better define various target audiences in the outreach activities, and be clear on the objectives of the communication process. So is it actually only aimed at increasing awareness, or are we also concerned about how information is to be used? clarity on how information can be relevant to stakeholders without changing the text of the reports, such as the AR5. Also, trying to put forward possibilities and modalities for outreach, making sure that the communication gaps are closed, and without harming the integrity of the IPCC products. So in the process of doing so, there's a recommendation to make sure that the communication process is organized. There's a good communication practice among IPCC authors. I know that there was a reaction here somewhere, and that IPCC authors can perhaps be engaged in training, counseling, and education to improve that capacity for communication, and making sure that the outreach sticks to the mandate of IPCC of policy-relevant outreach and not policy prescriptive. Okay. But how do we get the stakeholders to be more interested in IPCC products? There's a general opinion that further actions need to be taken in making sure that information is made more available and accessible for broader audience. And we encourage IPCC to engage organizations that take elements of the IPCC report and communicate them in more audience-specific format. Of course, there was a suggestion in the earlier report not to engage in correcting misinformation, but as a recommendation, if it ever comes to a point where IPCC information is misused or misrepresented, or there's a takedown policy, just a suggestion. And the outreach must consider the needs and values of stakeholders, and making sure that the IPCC reports are shared in events organized by other organizations, starting with the negotiators and with business. But there's also a need to define what interface actually means. Okay, now question of where the resource will come from. So there was a suggestion to open the trust fund to voluntary contributions from stakeholders. You have a trust fund. Is it open to voluntary stakeholders where necessary? Perhaps we can try to propose the utilization of the Green Climate Fund for the IPCC outreach, or use the opportunities. That's a suggestion. Why not? And then use opportunities provided by the Paris Agreement. So there's a lot of opportunities for capacity building, technology transfer, for instance, the review of the Warsaw mechanism, whereby the IPCC report can be used and made more relevant, so we can use those opportunities. And continue organizing regional and national events that take into consideration local priorities and encourage participation of authors. At the same time, when we do, when outreach is done, there's a suggestion to make sure that there's regional involvement of various stakeholders that you see there. I won't read them individually, but there's a long list. There's also regarding the mandate to ensure the presentation to non-specialists. And how do we propose going about that? One, perhaps the IPCC Secretariat can prepare a generic set of presentation deck to ensure accountability, understanding, and communication skills. There was a suggestion that the preparation of this presentation deck must go through a validation process, but to give room for the authors to customize the presentations that can be most relevant to various stakeholders, encourage media and presentation trainings, and develop guidelines for speakers to customize them for each event. So social media. So in terms of the use of the current products, so we do encourage the engagement of scientific writers, promote web streaming, and promote participation in IPCC activities. If there if agreed, I mean, remote participation that is. But there are also suggestions to investigate how the IPCC can make broad use of the social media, that there can be a review of the existing practices in the social media used by the IPCC Secretariat, and analyze and improve coherence between official IPCC communication by authorized spokesperson and the broader community of experts. Now, the children in particular made a recommendation where it is possible that the reports can be transformed in, can be made into videos with pictures and some graphics and illustrations, no longer than 3 to 5 minutes. So it can be a series, yeah, 3 to 5 minutes, and uploaded in social media and possibly translated in multiple languages. That IPCC assists children in making videos for children. There's a suggestion to have 2 IPCC sites, one for adults and one for children. I don't know what you, yeah, interesting. I think we're all saying many perhaps will go to the children's site. Okay, because it'll be more understandable. So, oh, sorry, there was no sign off for this one, but there was an earlier discussion on branding and recall. Identify perhaps who manages content and outreach and communication within the IPCC. I mean, just clarity on that. I think that's about it for our presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica, for a rich presentation of the discussions in working in Breakout Group C. Andreas?
I would like to amend something, because I'm not sure what you said about the search tags is understood by everyone.
Okay.
Because the idea is that this opens up the possibility for more stakeholder involvement. That is, if one would collect tags, search tags, up to the end of the scoping process, and have, in addition to the scoping product being sort of the table of content or a sketch of how the report should be structured, that we would also have this list of search tags, and the author teams are then asked to make sure that the chapter, however it is structured, is going to address all of these search tags. And the idea is, of course, let's be a bit science fiction here. Maybe we would have an app, an AR6 app, and you could just enter some of these search tags and get your custom report, which would then really tailor towards the stakeholder interests more. So that's behind that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Simbisai?
Thanks for what was very interesting to see. I think I just have a general comment, particularly around the social media, and suggest maybe we need to have a mapping of some sorts which looks at the most efficient and effective communication channels in different regions, because I think it'll differ from Latin America to Africa to Southern Africa. There'll be those distinct differences that I think, as the whole engaging stakeholder outreach, will need to take into account.
Okay.
Stuart?
Yeah, thank you.
Just a quick question on the scoping exercise and bringing in other organisations, because we had a similar discussion and the value of doing that separately or via governments, and whether you could just expand why you came to the recommendation of having 2 levels of scoping, and what the benefits and potential negatives with that process is.
Okay,
If
Jessica.
I remember, I'll try to respond to this, but if in any way I do not capture it, and my group mates will actually help out. So from a layman's perspective, so we tried to review what's in the IPCC document, and it actually says there that scoping should involve experts that represented, various sectoral interests. And a lot, many members of the group felt uncomfortable that these representatives were only selected So to guarantee that representation, to make sure that there are pre-scoping processes that engage various stakeholders. And then make sure that the experts that are engaged truly represent a broader set, of stakeholders, and their expertise, their status as the expert on that field is validated by organizations, climate change networks before they become part of the final scoping meeting. So that was why we came up with the suggestion.
Okay. Leo?
Thank you. A lot of products or recommendations that you seem to go very well with the others in the previous breakout group, sort of generally going in the same direction. I spotted one contradiction that was on handling disinformation of IPCC products.
Oh, the
We
takedown
said
policy.
the takedown policy. I don't know what it is, shooting down the... But anyway, so we took a different view,
Yeah.
and maybe there may be more elements that contradict, and we would need some guidance how to deal with that.
I think perhaps Jonathan can come back to that in his concluding remarks, because all the rest will end up on his table.
Yeah. Okay, I will not respond to that. So Jonathan can respond to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
okay. Thank you too. for,
Now we
Okay,
have
thanks.
one more group, and then we will also hear from